Nigeria. The distinctive feature of Nigerian political life, as it has evolved since World War II, has been that Coleman has called it the reorganization of nationalism, the regionalization of nationalism, whereas in most of the other new states, the final phases of the pursuit of independence saw a progressive unification of diverse elements into an intensely solidary opposition to colonial rule. Open dissidence emerging only after devolution and the inevitable warning of revolutionary comradeship. In Nigeria, tension between various primordial groups increased in the last decade of dependency. After 1946, the Nigerian struggle for freedom was less a matter of defying foreign authority and more a matter of drawing boundaries, founding capitals, and distributing powers in such a way as to dampen and contain sharpening ethno-regional hostilities prior to the disappearance of that authority. It was marked not much by growing insurgency in order to force the British to leave as by feverish negotiation in both Lagos and London in order to create a modus vivendi among the Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa Fulani so that they could live. The arrangement ultimately devised in a 240-page fine print constitution was a radically federal one, composed of three powerful constituent regions: the northern, the southeastern, and the southwestern, each with its own capital, its own parliament, cabinet, and high court, and its own budget. Each region was dominated by a particular ethnic group, respectively, the Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba, a particular political party, the Northern People's Congress, NPC, the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, and the Action Group, AG, and a particular political personality, Alhaji Sir Amadu Bello, the Sardauna Sultan of Sokoto, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, and Chief of Obafemi Awolowo, perched somewhat insecurely. On top of these regional strongholds was the federal government at Lagos as the arena in which the sort of two against one coalition politics one would naturally expect from this type of three-person game took place, and out of whose changeful processes the authoritative leadership to fill the vacuum at the center of the system was supposed at length to emerge. The sort of form that leadership was to take, who has to provide it, and how, in the working of this switch-clock governmental mechanism, it was to actually be produced remained, however, entirely obscure. In the meantime, the triangular pattern of primordial identification crystallized in the country at large, as the tribal society of traditional Nigeria gradually regrouped themselves into the regional linguistic and in the Muslim nor religious folk societies of modern Nigeria. But though increasingly important as the country's ethnic skeleton, this pattern did not exhaust the full variety of ingrained consciousness of kind, because in each region there remained reminded a large number of smaller groups outside the Kore Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo areas, at least somewhat resistant to assimilation to these broader subnational entities. And it was in these marginal areas, the southern half of the north, the eastern edge of the west, and the southern and east borders of the east, that the most vital electoral competition between major ethnic groups tended to take place, as each party attempted with some success to capitalize on minorities' resentments within their opponents' strongholds. What appeared at the center as a three-way subnational competition, and the regional capitals as more and more a one-party ethnocracy represented in the countryside a much more complex and diversified network of tribal alliance and oppositions. It was a tiered system in which local loyalties remained mostly organized in traditional terms. Provincial ones became organized in party political terms, and national ones were only barely organized at all. Thus, although the regionalization of nationalism proceed led to the establishment of a party system and constitutional structure in which Nigeria's several hundred primordial groups, ranging from the nearly 6 million Hausa to tribal fragments of only a few hundred, were able, for a while, to live in at least reasonable amity. It also created a void at the very heart of national political life, and left the country more or less acephalous. After independence in October 1960, political attention consequently turned toward the federal capital at Lagos, as parties and their leaders jockeyed for starting positions from which to launch their campaigns to correct this condition. After an initial attempt to form a governing alliance between the economically and politically more advanced eastern and western regions against the more traditional north, stumbled over the entrenched hostility between the mobile, aggressive Igbo intelligentsia and the solid, wealthy Yoruba business class, and between the mercurial Dr. Azikiwe and the lofty chief Awolowo. The North and East formed such an alliance, isolating the West. Azikiwe resigned the Eastern Premiership to become Governor-General. In theory, a merely symbolic office, but which he hoped to make into something more. The Sardauna of Sokoto, choosing to remain Lion of the North in his regional premiership, sent his lieutenant Alhaji Sid Abubakar Tafawa Balewa to serve in his stead as federal prime minister, and Awolowo, odd man out in these fears of what was a series of 2-against-1 coalitions, resigned his post as Western Premier to become leader of the opposition in the federal parliament. Post taken, the maneuvering began. The federal parliament decided to form a fourth state, the Midwest, out of the minority area of the western region. Awolowo shifted from markedly right to a markedly left-wing ideological position in an attempt to shake the somewhat Tory government and ride the anti-neocolonialism horse to power, splitting the action group in the process. Tension within the NCNC between the increasingly accommodative old guard and the still radical young Turks increased, and so on. But all these more confused issues than clarify them. Complicated matters rather than simplify them. Independent, and this is writer for less than a year. For less than a year, Nigeria, the newest of the new states considered here, offers but the most informed materials upon which to base an assessment of its essential character and probable future. Possesses of what would appear to be an extraordinarily unwieldy set of political institutions hurriedly put together in the last hectic years of constitution marking before independence, lacking a comprehensive national party, a superhuman political leader, and overarching religious traditions, or a common cultural background, and seemingly of several minds about what to do with freedom now that it has, almost as a matter of course, received it. It has an unusual tentative up in the air quality even for the new state. Nigeria was the least well-defined of the generally ill-defined states reviewed as examples in my original essay. At the time, its situation seemed at once the most hopeful and the most ominous. Hopeful because it seems to have escaped the usual upheavals of decolonization, to be large enough to be economically viable, and to have inherited a moderate, well-trained and experienced elite. Ominous because its primordial group tensions were both extremely great and unbelievably complex. The sense of ominousness proved to be the prophetic one. In January 1966, a military coup led to the death of a number of northern political leaders, including Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, and the establishment of an Igbo-led military regime. A second coup, led by northern from a minor, that is non-Hausa tribe, Colonel Yakubu Gowon, eventuated in the massacre of somewhere between 10 and 30,000 Igbos living in the Hausa areas of the north, while anywhere from 200,000 to 1.5 million Igbos fled from the north to their eastern region homeland. In May of 1967, Colonel Gowon assumed emergency powers and sought to divide the eastern region into 3 states as a device to increase the power of the non-Igbo Easterners and decrease that of the Igbos. The Igbos, forming themselves into the Republic of Biafra, rebelled, and after nearly 3 years of some of the most bitter warfare of modern times, perhaps more than 2 million people were killed and countless others died of starvation, were suppressed by the federal government under Gowon, now a general and head of the country. After all this, surely one of the most dramatic examples of the power of primordial loyalties and antipathies, though again, the causes of the coups and the war were not merely primordial, as the involvement of the great powers demonstrated. The tentative, up-in-the-air quality of the country remains, as does its complex, intense, and but narrowly balanced pattern of group distrust. Fifth, Center and arc regionalism and dual leadership in Indonesia, single-party interracial alliance in Malaysia, aggressive assimilationism, rapid unconstitutional legalism in Burma, a cosmopolitan central party with provincial machines fighting a multi-front war against every sort of parochialism known to man, and a few know only to induce. In India, sectarian slave making and log rolling in Lebanon, Janus-faced autocratic rule in Morocco, and auto-focused check and balance scrimmaging in Nigeria. These systems as merely unique as they appear? From this array of efforts after political order, does any evidence emerge from the claim that the integrative revolution is a general process? Over the cases reviewed here, at least the common developmental tendency does stand out. The aggregation of independently defined, specifically outlined traditional primordial groups into larger, more diffuse units whose implicit frame of reference is not the local scene but the nation, in the sense of the whole society encompassed by the new civil state. The leading principle in terms of which this lumping is mainly carried out varies: region in Indonesia, race in Malaysia, language in India, religion in Lebanon, custom in Morocco, and quasi-kinship in Nigeria. Whether it involves becoming an outer islander in addition to a Minangkabau, a Kashin over and above a Dulen, a Christian as well as a Maronite, or a Yoruba rather than only an Egba, the process, though variously advanced both as between countries and within them, is general. It is a progressive extension of the sense of primordial similarity and difference generated from the direct and protected encounter of culturally diverse groups in local contexts to more broadly defined groups of a similar sort interacting within the framework of the entire national society, an extension Friedman has described particularly well for Malaysia. Malaysia was and remains a culturally plural society, paradoxically, from a purely structural point of view. Its plural nature is more marked today than ever before. Nationalism and political independence in their early phases have tended to define, on a pan-Malaysian basis, ethnic blocks, which in former times were merely categories. Then the social map of Malaysia was, so to speak, made up of a kaleidoscope of small culturally defined units rearranging themselves in accordance with local conditions. The Malays did not interact with the Chinese and the Indians. Some Malays interacted with some Chinese and some Indians, but as Malays, Chinese, and Indians come to be realized as structural entities on a nationwide scale, they can begin to have total relations with one another. The emergence of a nationwide system of ethnic blocks engages in total relations with one another, sets the stage for direct clash between personal identity and political integrity in the new states by generalizing and extending tribal, racial, linguistic, or other principles of primordial solidarity, such as a system permits the maintenance of a profoundly rooted consciousness of kind, and relates that consciousness to the developing civil order. It allows one to continue to claim public acknowledgement of one's existence and import in terms of the familiar symbols of group uniqueness, while at the same time becoming more and more drawn into political society, cast in a mold wholly different from the natural community those symbols define. But on the other hand, it also simplifies and concentrates groups' antagonisms, raises the specter of separatism by superimposing a comprehensive political significance upon those antagonisms, and particularly when the crystallizing ethnic blocs outrun state boundaries, stirs international controversies. The integrative revolution does not do away with ethnocentrism, it merely modernizes it,